Good afternoon and welcome to the North Carolina Humanities presentation of the John Tyler Caldwell Award for the Humanities. I am Sherry Paula Watkins, Executive Director of North Carolina Humanities and your MC for today's events. I am so happy you've joined us today. We are gathering from places both near and far to celebrate our 2021 honoree, Alex Albright. Over the next hour, you'll hear special remarks from Alex, messages from Alex's friends and colleagues, our board chair, and special address from our guest lecturer, John Shelton Reed. I want to thank our sponsors and supporters and all those folks who have made a gift in honor of Alex. We are so appreciative of your support and for helping us with our work around the state. Throughout today's program, we encourage you to use the chat to send a message of congratulations to Alex and connect with others. Before our celebration begins, I want to spend a few minutes telling you about who we are. North Carolina Humanities is a statewide nonprofit. We are the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we are the state affiliate of the Library of Congress's Center for the Book. And through our work, we provide free, engaging public humanities programs. We offer grant funding to local organizations like museums and cultural centers. And we promote the importance of books, reading, and libraries. It's hard to believe, but it has been exactly 1 year to the day since our last Caldwell Award celebration. Throughout the many challenges of 2021, confronting prejudice, questioning what is just and true, and dealing with separation and loss, North Carolina Humanities remains inspired by the conversations we have heard and the empathy we have seen. As a state, we have risen together to meet these challenges, finding ways to connect, reaching beyond what we knew as normal, establishing new ways of learning and discovery, all to pursue a brighter path forward. Literature, history, and culture have the amazing power to provide respite, healing, understanding, and strength. If you've participated in one of our Watershed Moments Book Club Zoom meetings, if you've listened to one of our Identity in the Carolinas panel discussions, if you visited your local library or read a book, or if you have gathered your community together to apply for one of our grants, then you know the humanities are an incredible force. In the midst of the pandemic, our state's cultural organizations have continued to provide programming, resources, and services to keep communities connected. That's why last month we awarded grants to support 90 North Carolina organizations affected by COVID-19. With the help from the National Endowment for the Humanities and our generous donors, these funds are bringing stability and energizing creativity in North Carolina. For the humanities to thrive, it takes courageous and willing individuals to lead the way. At North Carolina Humanities, we recognize these leaders with our annual John Tyler Caldwell Award for the Humanities. The award is named for its first recipient and founding member of North Carolina Humanities, the late Dr. John Tyler Caldwell. This year, we are pleased to recognize Alex Albright, who has dedicated his life to serving North Carolina with great purpose and passion. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest speaker, chosen by Alex Albright, John Shelton Reed. John Shelton Reed grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee, studied at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and received his PhD from Columbia University. Most of the 22 books he has written or edited are about the South. His articles have appeared in periodicals ranging from science to Victorian studies to Southern living. And his country song, My Tears Spoiled My Aim, has been recorded by Tommy Edwards. He has been a Guggenheim Fellow, a Fellow of the National Humanities Center, and twice a Fellow of the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. He has lectured at over 300 colleges and universities in the United States and abroad, including a number of universities in India as a Fulbright Distinguished Lecturer, and has held visiting positions at many institutions, including the Hebrew University at Jerusalem, the Institute of United States Studies at the University of London, and All Souls College, Oxford University. For the academic year 1996-97, he was the Pitt Professor of American History and Institutions at the University of Cambridge, where he is now an honorary fellow of St. Catherine's College and a life member of Clear Hall. For some years, he taught at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, retiring in 2000 as William Rand Keenan Jr. Professor of Sociology and Director of the Howard Odum Institute for Research in Social Science. He helped to found the university's Center for the Study of the American South and the quarterly Southern Cultures. He has served as president of the Southern Sociological Society and the Southern Association for Public Opinion Research, and was appointed by President Reagan to the Council of the National Endowment for the Humanities. He has received a number of prizes, honorary degrees, and awards, including election to the Fellowship of Southern Writers, which he has recently served as Chancellor. He has been a consultant for Southern Living, Quaker Grits, and the Turner South Cable Network, dramaturg for the musical comedy Kudzu, and a judge at the Memphis in May World Championship Barbecue Cooking Contest. He is co-founder and eminence grease of the Campaign for Real Barbecue, trueq.org, and a lieutenant colonel in the Unorganized Militia of South Carolina. Without further ado, here is John Shelton Reed. Please enjoy.
Good afternoon, and glad you're here to help me celebrate the continuing achievement of Alex Albright. I wish we could be together face to face, but that's not the way it is this year, is it? We're talking here about a man who's being honored, who has written that, I'm quoting him now, "Foodways dominate my research and writing interests in Southern culture," which is ongoing. So he's best known for his interest in collards. He once said that if he hadn't disliked collards so much, he might not have gotten a job at East Carolina. That's another story. But his connection to barbecue, which he does like, is equally significant. He's a son of the Piedmont, but he has now eats East Carolina style barbecue. The North Carolina Pork Council has anointed him as a whole hog pig picking judge. And we count him as an early and ardent supporter of the Campaign for Real Barbecue, which you can check out online at trueq.org. This is also a man who, as the editor of the North Carolina Literary Review in 1996, appointed the estimable Bill Harmon to be that magazine's barbecue editor, the first such figure in the country, although that distinction was wrongly attributed to Texas Monthly some 20 years later. So I submit that it's not inappropriate to talk about barbecue at an occasion honoring Alex Albright. As I said, I only regret that we're not together breaking bread and picking pig while we do it. Let's start with that word, barbecue. It means a great many things, has meant a great many things. It can be used it's a name for a technique. We talk about barbecuing something, it's a verb. It can be an apparatus in some circles. Yankees and Australians talk about putting something on the barbecue. It can be an occasion. People talk about going to a barbecue. Or it can be, and North Carolina primarily is, a food. We talk about eating barbecue. It's something you put on a plate or in a sandwich. Let me start by talking about barbecue as a technique. People for a long time have known that if you have tough or gnarly meat, the best way to cook it is over a slow fire for a long time. Here are some monks in the 14th century cooking chickens beside a fire and cutting it up, taking it off to the table. But Southerners tend to believe that barbecue is not barbecue unless it's called barbecue. And so for our purposes, the history of barbecue really starts in the West Indies and Caribbean in the 16th century, where the Europeans who came to that area found the Indians, the local Indians, cooking a variety of reptiles and fish and small mammals on a rack that they called, what the Spanish heard as, a barbacoa. And that word made its way eventually into the mainland of North America, where people started having what they called barbecues, occasions. George Washington wrote in his diary about going to several barbecues. Um, at that time, and for some time after, people cooked barbecue in pits. Literally, you hear about pit barbecue or barbecue pits. They started digging holes in the ground, putting framework over it, putting coals down in there and cooking, as you see here, various animals, in this case, a whole hog here, and whole hogs there. Pit barbecue. At some point, somebody realized that you could elevate the pit, build a raised pit so you didn't have to bend over, do all this work. And here are a couple of North Carolina examples, both from Eastern North Carolina. And then later, and still, somebody said, all right, we don't have to, we can enclose the pit. We put doors on it, keep the smoke in. We don't have to go with the sheet metal that you see here on the right-hand side. Put doors on it, we shovel the coals underneath. These are examples from Lexington, North Carolina. There's another way of doing it, and it's not all that common in North Carolina, at least not yet, but it's what's done in Texas. And that's to have a pit here, a cooking pit with a side firebox. They're burning logs in here, and the smoke goes through there and circles around, comes out the chimney at the other end. Here's a version, a portable version. Same deal, firebox, smoke chamber, smokestack. That's increasingly common way to cook barbecue, but it's not been the North Carolina way, at least not until recently. I talked about these British colonists going to barbecues, and that indeed is how barbecue was usually served for a very long time, because typically a barbecue produces large quantities of meat, and before you had refrigeration, you had to have large quantities of people to eat that meat. So community barbecues became frequent occasions in what would later become the United States, and after it became the United States, they continued. Here you see a pit, barbecue pit, people tending it. Another barbecue pit here, people tending it. Another here, people tending it. And in the background there, perhaps you can see that pink spot, that's a politician making a speech. Because politicians have been drawn to barbecue like flies. Well, nevertheless, politicians have been drawn to barbecue for a very long time. And eventually politicians started having their own barbecues to collect crowds they could speak to. This is a tradition which is, I'm sorry to say, pretty well past. There's one notable example in North Carolina, that's down near Charlotte, Valley Creek Presbyterian Church, which for 90 years or so now has been holding an annual barbecue where they cook hogs, shoulders rather, down there over coals and pits. And politicians gather here, and you see them with their signs and they're shaking hands, generally greeting the people, looking for votes. This is held on the fourth Thursday in October. Stop and think about that. That's a week or so before Election Day. That's the connection there. That's one surviving, continuing community barbecue. People say North Carolinians don't talk about barbecue except as a food. Well, they do talk about barbecue as an occasion, used to more often in the past. In the early part of the last century, in fact, just about exactly 100 years ago, you started to see around Lexington, what we would today call pop-up operations. These people have a barbecue stand here that's opposite the courthouse in Lexington. On courthouse days, they gather there and they would sell barbecue. Goldsboro had been done earlier, 1890s. Here's with people selling barbecue out of it. That is usually in connection with tobacco auctions. But so instead of community barbecues where everybody gathered and they cooked barbecue for them, these are kind of retail operations, although linked to special occasions when there are a lot of people drawn to something or other. After the advent of the automobile, things changed, and you began to get barbecue restaurants, the sort that we're quite familiar with these days. People, you don't have to bring the barbecue to the people can go to the barbecue, and these places are often on the outskirts of town to minimize fire danger. Here are four of my favorite places in North Carolina. I love the variety of architecture there. The Skylight Inn incidentally has this Capitol dome on top because somebody once called them the capital of barbecue. So Pete Jones built a dome on his place. Short Sugar's classic drive-in barbecue, drive-in architecture. The golden age of these places was sort of the 1950s. Every town had one, seemed like. There were scores of them, maybe hundreds of them around. These are ads taken from various towns' yellow pages in the 1950s. A lot of these places, most of these places are gone now. A few are still around: Hersey's, Bridges Barbecue Lodge, Clyde Cooper. But most of them have now closed, and that's a continuing theme. Here's the passing of great barbecue restaurants. Let's get on to what they're serving, the meat. We talked about barbecue as a technique. You can apply that technique to just about anything, and people have barbecued squirrel, rabbit, possum, raccoon, alligator, tofu, you name it. You can barbecue it. But in North Carolina, well, in fact, in North Carolina, for quite recently, a lot of things were barbecued. Here's an ad from Gastonia in the 20s. They're cooking shotes, that is hot pork, cooking chicken, cooking mutton, which is hard to find these days outside of Kentucky. But North Carolinians have always been fond of pork. In the 18th century, 1728, William Byrd II, a sort of Virginia aristocrat, called North Carolinians a porcivorous people. He did not approve of it. He said, we eat so much pork, we grunt when we talk. But we do eat a lot of pork, and there are indeed more hogs than people in North Carolina as we speak. So barbecue in North Carolina pretty much is pork. Whether you're talking about whole hogs cooked here in Wilson in an old-fashioned pit on spits, as you see, or as we see in the Piedmont now, pork shoulders. This is Lexington in the 1920s. This is Lexington 2015. They're not cooking whole hogs, they're cooking shoulders. And that story of that transition, that's a late development. That story is something I'll say a bit more about later. Get out of North Carolina, all kinds of things happen. You go to the deep South, and what you find for barbecue is ribs. Yes, you find pork shoulder, but you also find ribs, not just as something that's part of the whole hog when you cook it, but as something that's bought separately and cooked separately, pork ribs. North Carolina, till recently, ribs weren't barbecue, except as part of a hog, a whole hog. When people said you want ribs, you go to a rib place. You go to a barbecue place, you get barbecue, which meant either chopped whole hog or chopped shoulder, usually. I mentioned mutton in Kentucky, up around Owensboro, Kentucky. They still serve barbecued mutton, and it's the only place I know that does that on a regular basis. Owensboro calls itself the barbecue capital of the world, which is ridiculous, of course, but if they call themselves the barbecued mutton capital of the world, I don't think anybody would argue with them. Nobody would want to argue with them. I once said I hadn't had any barbecue I didn't like. Well, after I went to Owensboro, I could take or leave the barbecue, let's say that. You find in Texas something else going on. There are a lot of cows in Texas, and they're eating beef brisket, and they're eating sausage, and they're eating both pork and beef ribs. They're in Central Texas, and they're calling it barbecue. That's another long story, but Texas barbecue is its own thing. I'll say some more about that when I get around to talking about sausage. But here's one of those cookers I talked about with the side firebox. It's loaded up with various weird pieces of meat, and they're burning logs, as I say, not just coals, because the meat's not over the fire, it's beside it. I mentioned sauce. Most people these days think of barbecue as they should, as slow cooked meat cooked in presence of wood smoke from coals or logs in Texas. Most people, at least east of Texas, think of it as having something to do with sauce of some kind. That goes way back, that association. The first thing that most Southerners would recognize as barbecue, if you wanted to call that, you found in the West Indies in the 17th century. This chap, Jean-Baptiste Labat, was a missionary to Martinique, and he went to a barbecue in Martinique where the local Indians had their barbacoa fired up, and on it they were cooking pork, cooking hogs. The Europeans had brought hogs earlier, and the Indians quickly figured out, it makes a better meal than snakes and fish and reptiles and rodents. So they're cooking hogs, and they are mopping the hogs with a mixture of lime juice and red pepper. Now you think about that. The lime juice, a sour taste, red pepper, and a little bit of salt. That basically became the dominant, in fact, the only mop and sauce used on the mainland for many years. A lot of recollections in various memoirs of barbecues in antebellum days These are three of them. Invariably, they describe the sauce. The sauce is just that, except they've switched from lime juice to vinegar because you don't have a lot of lime trees growing in Kentucky or Mississippi. So vinegar, red pepper, salt, and maybe a pinch of this, pinch of that, more for mystique really than anything else. So I call that the mother sauce because that's what everybody was doing, even in Texas, until quite late in the game. This is still the sauce that's used at Wilbur's Barbecue at Goldsboro. You can see here and all over eastern North Carolina. It's vinegar, red pepper, no tomato, salt, and maybe a pinch of this, pinch of that, just to add some mystique to it so you can have a secret recipe. But doesn't make a big difference. Here in Scott's Variety Store, Hemingway, South Carolina, down in the PD, they literally mop the hogs as they cook on this cooker, mop them with a mop that they dunk in this big vat, which is full of vinegar or red pepper, salt, and they throw in a few lemons. Just I don't know why they do it, but why not? That is the hottest sauce I've ever tasted. That red is entirely from red pepper. There's no tomato anywhere near this. And the first time I went, I made the mistake of asking for extra sauce. Don't do it. It's got plenty of sauce as it is coming off the cooker. Something happened, though, in the late 19th century, in 1876, at the Centennial Exposition. Mr. H.J. Heinz introduced his bottled tomato ketchup. Now, other people have been making ketchup before that. History of tomatoes and barbecue is a troubled one that goes way back. But in 1876, he introduced his bottled ketchup, and it caught on and spread. Incidentally, this is the same exposition that introduced kudzu to the United States, which also caught on and spread, but that's a different matter. So kudzu, Heinz tomato ketchup, other tomato ketchups began to imitate it. At some point, somebody in the Salisbury, Lexington area decided, why don't we put some ketchup in our vinegar-based sauce? And this is heresy east of Raleigh and still is. People go rave about ketchup-based sauce. It's not ketchup-based, it's still vinegar-based, but it's got some ketchup in it that turns it redder. It's a little sweeter. It's not thick though. Look here, it's pouring it. It's basically vinegar with ketchup in it. They call it dip for reasons I could talk about at length, but won't. This is at Lexington Barbecue, and they put it on pork shoulder. I showed you earlier, people cooking pork shoulders in Lexington, not whole hogs. That's the difference between East and West. You know, West, Piedmont, you're getting pork shoulder and this sauce with some ketchup in it. East of Raleigh, you're getting whole hogs for the most part with same vinegar-based sauce, but with no ketchup. Okay? People go to war about this, but the truth is those two styles are very much like each other, especially when you compare them to something else. But how did that happen and why did that happen? In a book called Holy Smoke, my late wife and I looked into it, and I think we make a pretty convincing case that it has to do with the Germans. Here's where you find Lutherans in North Carolina, and this is exactly the mother lode of Piedmont-style barbecue. And the Germans have that sweet and sour taste. They eat pork shoulder. That's a big deal in Bavaria. In fact, in Bavaria, I ate something very much like Piedmont barbecue. It didn't have any cayenne pepper, but it certainly had vinegar, and it had smoked pork. So we argue in that book that the Germans were doing it. They were doing it at home. They started doing it with barbecue, and they opened their stand and started selling it. Why not? They liked the taste. They were used to it. Incidentally, one of the things that these Germans came here in the 1700s. One of the things people hang on to, two of the things they hang on to are their religion and their cuisine. Down in South Carolina, you have another story. You get a sauce with mustard in it. Now, got so much mustard in it, in fact, that it's kind of alarming. School bus yellow sauce. This is unique to a stretch of South Carolina from Charleston down up to Columbia. And here again, it's Germans. If you look at the names of the people who are involved with this mustard sauce barbecue, you get names like Haidt, Schwetman, Bessinger, Scheele, all of those German names. In fact, in the Carolinas, we have 4 distinct styles of sauce. And one of my friends calls us the Balkans of barbecue. Here you go. Here you got the mother sauce, that vinegar and red pepper sauce. Here you got the vinegar sauce with a little ketchup added. Here's the mustard corridor. And here in the mountains and along the Georgia coast, well, what you've got is something I'll get to a little later, but it's basically a thick ketchupy sauce like what most Americans think of as barbecue sauce. Mentioned the mustard sauce, the mutton barbecue in Owensboro. Here it is on the plate. Looks rather unappetizing, I think, but it's sprinkled with what they call black dip. That is their sauce. Major component is Worcestershire sauce. Very strong taste. So is mutton. I think the function of the dip is to disguise the taste of mutton, but I don't say that to my Kentucky friends. Anyway, here again, it's the Germans. If you look at who's doing it, there are a lot of German Catholics in that part of Kentucky, and they serve it at parish picnics. They cook sheep and put this Worcestershire sauce thing on it. More Germans. Okay, go on to Texas, Central Texas. I mentioned the brisket and the sausage and the ribs. They have not used sauce on it. They think the meat speaks for itself. They cook it. Brisket, incidentally, this evolved from German and Czech butcher shops that smoked their leftovers and sold them. And again, Germans. In fact, they're everywhere. If you look at, well, not everywhere. If you look at where you find people of German descent in the United States or in the South, here are a bunch in the Piedmont, here are a bunch in South Carolina, here are a bunch up in Kentucky, here are a bunch up in Texas. And those are those four kinds of barbecue I talked about. I have no idea what's going on up here in Arkansas, northwestern Arkansas. As far as I know, they don't have a distinct style of barbecue. There's another kind of barbecue, though, and another ethnic influence, and that's found in the Deep South. Here's where you find African Americans in the South, rural African Americans. This is the old Cotton Belt, it runs from Southside Virginia around here to East Texas, up and down along the Mississippi. And the barbecue there is something else again. It tends to be, as I said, ribs, also pork shoulders, and it's served with a thick, sweet tomato-based sauce. You find this thick, sweet tomato-based sauce in the Deep South, Memphis, which is kind of the capital of the Deep South, Kansas City, which is in barbecue terms an outpost of Memphis, and for some reason it eludes me, in the Appalachians. That's that North Carolina barbecue region. Here's some ribs with the sticky red sauce on them, as you see, from a really good place in Memphis. That kind of sauce is what most Americans think of as barbecue sauce. If you go to the grocery store, you can buy Kraft original barbecue sauce, which was introduced 50 years ago and became very popular. A lot of other people make a barbecue sauce. All these things have in common. They're basically ketchup with various things added to it, usually some heat, usually some sweetness, occasionally some whiskey, but they're more like each other. They're more like Kraft than either one is like our North Carolina vinegar sauces. As I say, there are lots of them. Here's some more. Again, they all have that one thing in common. Here's some more. All have that one thing in common. Here's still more. I had fun putting these slides together. Plenty of barbecue sauces for sale in the grocery stores, on the internet, and outside the Carolinas and Texas. This is what people tend to think of as barbecue sauce. And increasingly in the Carolinas and Texas, probably here too. This is what people tend to think of as barbecue sauce. In fact, a lot of places serve what they call barbecue, and they cook chicken in the oven and slather some sauce on it and call it barbecue chicken. You know, they're scoundrels, and that's wrong, but that's what they do. There are other forms that are unique to smaller locales. One of my favorite examples is this from Memphis, a restaurant called Rendezvous, opened by a Greek guy named Charlie Virgos. In 1947 or thereabouts, Charlie Virgos was serving ribs, as people do and did in Memphis. And he said, well, why don't I make this rub for him? He was Greek, as I said. He made this rub that's got oregano and thyme and all this kind of stuff in it. And he rubs the meat with it. He doesn't use sauce. He rubs the meat with it. He cooks it. He sprinkles some wine when he serves it. This is the style of ribs called dry ribs. Other places in Memphis started imitating this style. And you can find it all over Memphis. And increasingly, you can find it in places outside of Memphis that I'll get to in a minute that serve all kinds of barbecue in one spot. Another micro region worth mentioning is around Decatur, Alabama, where a guy named Big Bob Gibson, who ran a barbecue place, invented a white sauce that's mayonnaise based. And he barbecued his chicken, cooked it in a barbecue cooker, smoked it. And at the end, he took it out and dunked it in a bucket full of this white sauce. And it's actually pretty good, I will say. But I hope it doesn't catch on all over the South. I like having to go to Alabama to get it. Incidentally, in Alabama, they're starting to use it on other things besides chicken. I think that's getting carried away. So what about the future? Where are we going from here? The golden age of the barbecue restaurant, the hometown, family-owned barbecue restaurant, that has passed, I'm sorry to say. A lot of those places have closed. Could start listing them in North Carolina. You'd recognize a lot of the names, I expect, but they're gone. I keep a sort of running tab, and it's one every few months or so goes on. Some cases it doesn't matter to me because what they're serving is no longer barbecue. A lot of places in North Carolina, in fact, the majority of places that claim to sell barbecue in North Carolina now sell roast pork, slow roasted pork that's untouched by any kind of wood smoke. Even the kind that comes in a bottle. It's not barbecue as it has been understood. I think it's not barbecue at all. But a friend of mine and I have started something called the Campaign for Real Barbecue. You can check us out at q.org. We are going to recognize, identify, celebrate, encourage places that cook 100% with wood, or at least mostly with wood. And we have this, which is the button I'm wearing in my shirt. Another thing that's going on, obviously, you can see, is the spread of chain barbecue restaurants, places that sell the same kind of barbecue in a great many different places. Sometimes they claim to be a local kind of thing. Red Hot Blue claims to sell Memphis barbecue. Dickey's claims to be Texas barbecue. But really, what most of them do, and what a lot of independent non-chain restaurants do, the new ones, is they sell just about every kind of meat. It's what I call the International House of Barbecue approach, and it's taking over. It's taking over everywhere. Keep your eye on it. There's a reason for this. You can deplore it. I do, but I can understand why it happens. These people are not in business to make me happy. They're in business to sell barbecue. And if you're working in a place like, to pick an example at random, Charlotte, okay, a lot of your customers come from somewhere else, and their idea of what barbecue is not what the local understanding has been for many decades. So they come in and they say, where are the ribs? Okay. So you sell them some ribs. And they say, where's the thick, sticky red sauce, the sticky fingers kind of sauce? They said, well, here it is. They just made some, put it out with the others. In fact, there's one place in Raleigh that, or Cary rather, that will remain nameless, that has 3 or 4 different kinds of meat, 4 or 5 different kinds of meat, maybe 8 or 9 sauces. None of them a North Carolina sauce, but that's Cary for you. Another development, and it's one that I actually approve of, is the rise of what's called craft barbecue. This is people, usually guys, who take a local style and aim to do it perfectly. One of the best examples of this is this guy named Aaron Franklin in Austin, Texas, who decided he was going to cook the best brisket that could be cooked. And he's kind of a barbecue geek. He studied how to do it. He designed his own smoker, and he tinkered around with temperatures and woods and rubs and all of that sort of thing. And he cooks possibly the best beef brisket you will ever taste. Here he is at work with his smoker. Let's see the side firebox. Here's his book he wrote, the well worth reading if you're interested in brisket at all. And here he is getting his James Beard Award, which the first barbecue cook to get a James Beard Award. He looks happy, and he should be. There are other people like that. A couple here in North Carolina, for example, Picnic in Durham, Buxton Hall in Asheville are doing old style barbecue. They're not doing anything innovative or fancy. They're just doing it really, really well, using good meat and good ingredients. It costs more. I mean, and that's a bit of a problem. These places are not the community centers that the local places were, where all kinds of people go and eat barbecue in the same room, You don't find that in a place where the sandwich costs $12, but it's good food, so I won't knock it. They're not in direct competition with the places I like. Another thing that's going on, kind of what has been called elevated barbecue. I despise that phrase because it implies that barbecue needed elevating. I've got an essay on the subject in a new book I just wrote, putting it down, but sometimes it's good food, I have to say. And this is chefy people. These are guys that are not ashamed to call themselves chefs. I mean, ordinarily, chef is not a word that's been connected with barbecue in the past, but these are chefs and they cook barbecue and they put in all sorts of chefy licks. And literally, it's all over the place. I've eaten at Fat Sow in Brooklyn. I've eaten at Pit Q in London. I've eaten at Smokeworks in Cambridge. I have not eaten the one in Aspen, the one in Palm Beach, Australia, the one in Paris. But what they are doing is innovative, creative barbecue. Some of us think innovation is uncalled for when it comes to barbecue, but sometimes it produces pretty good results. I mean, they do things like putting coffee in the rub, coffee grounds in the rub, raspberry in the sausage, various interesting little experiments. Their prices aren't low either, but there are a lot of these places. They tend to come and go. The mortality rate's pretty high. That was even before COVID came along. But catch one of these while it's still open, you might get a really good meal. It'll cost you. Another development that's just taking shape now, a really disturbing one, is we had smokeless barbecue earlier. It's a meatless barbecue. A lot of people not eating meat anymore, and some barbecue places are starting to cater to them. As I said, you can barbecue just about anything. Doesn't even have to be meat. You can cook halloumi cheese or portobello mushrooms. You can barbecue cauliflower, barbecue tofu here. A couple of the ones that are more convincing imitations of what we've understood to be barbecue heretofore are this jackfruit. Doesn't really taste like pulled pork, but it looks like it, and it, put enough sauce on it, it doesn't taste radically unlike it. That's some sort of Asian fruit that pulls like that. The other is this Beyond Meat, which is just coming in. Burger King selling Impossible Burgers. Well, this is the same deal. It's created in a laboratory, and it does a pretty good imitation of meat, I will say. They're not yet. It's mostly ground still, but if they start producing things that look like pork shoulders, I might smoke one just to see what happens. I'm going to stick with pork though for the time being. Well, that's a shape of things to come. I hope you've found something here of interest. I wish I were with you so we could ask questions and discuss it, but some other time. Right now, though, given the occasion, I think it would be appropriate for us to reach for a glass, in my case, a virtual glass, and yours probably too, and drink a virtual toast to our honoree, Alex Albright, and wish him all the best in years to come.
Thank you, John, for that wonderful presentation about the complex, rich, and tasty culture of barbecue. And now I'd like to turn the program over to one of our board trustees, Margaret Bauer, who will speak about Alex Albright's inspiring leadership and bestow his award. Louisiana native Margaret Bauer moved to North Carolina in 1996 to teach Southern literature at East Carolina University. She's the author of 4 books on Southern writers, most recently, A Study of Scarlets, Scarlett O'Hara, and Her Literary Daughters, and editor of 2 more on North Carolina playwright Paul Green. This is her 25th year serving as editor of the North Carolina Literary Review. In 2014, East Carolina University honored her with the Lifetime Achievement Award in Research and Creative Activity. In 2017, she received the North Carolina Award for Literature from Governor Roy Cooper. She was the 2018 John Tyler Caldwell Award for the Humanities laureate and began serving on the North Carolina Humanities Board of Trustees in 2019. Here's Margaret.
I have the privilege of introducing to you Alex Albright, the 2021 recipient of the John Tyler Caldwell Award, and I could not be more pleased. As editor of the North Carolina Literary Review for going on 25 years now, I owe Alex, my colleague and friend, so much for the direction my career took. Before his retirement in 2018, Alex was my colleague at East Carolina University. He joined the ECU Department of English faculty in 1981. Just imagine the number of students he inspired in his over 35 years at ECU, helping to shape many into writers. At ECU, too, he created the North Carolina Literary Review, which gives our students significant experience in editing and publishing to take with them into the workforce after graduation. Former Dean of Arts and Sciences, the late Keith Sparrow, once explained that he asked Alex to create what became NCLR because he, quote, wanted to make sure he was getting the journal into the best hands possible, adding, quote, anything Alex does, he does superbly, indeed. Within its first 3 years, NCLR won the Best New Journal Award from the national organization, the Council of Editors of Learned Journals, and numerous awards for its unique design. Alex would credit, rightfully so, his art director, Eva Roberts, for the design. But as editor, he had to be open to a design layout outside of the norm. From what I've witnessed, Alex has never shied away from trying something new. He once co-edited a whole collection of poems on collard greens. In the decades since NCLR's founding in 1992, that unique design, created long before a time when we all have access to easy-to-use graphic design software, influenced the look of literary magazines across the country. Many watching this know that when it comes to NCLR, I am certainly not unbiased. So I will let another's words explain Alex's contribution to North Carolina with the creation of NCLR. Jim Clark, former Dean of the School of Humanities and the Elizabeth H. Jordan Chair of Southern Literature at Barton College, wrote in his letter of support for Alex's nomination, NCLR, quote, is a compendium of the best of the history and culture of North Carolina. As editor of NCLR, he wrote, Alex tirelessly and selflessly promoted North Carolina literature. Professor Emeritus Clark continued, it is impossible to overestimate the importance of NCLR to the culture of the state of North Carolina. It is truly a treasure, providing the intellectual and creative work of the state a concrete local habitation and a name. Every issue is an immediate collector's item for both its content and its design, end quote. Alex served as editor for NCLR's first 5 years, establishing its reputation for in-depth coverage of the state's writers, world-renowned, just getting started, and those in between. And he was honored for this contribution to preserving and promoting the state's rich literary history and culture with the R. Hunt Parker Memorial Award given by the North Carolina Literary and Historical Association, and the Roberts Award for Literary Inspiration given by ECU's Joyner Library. Alex's important contribution to promoting North Carolina writers is also reflected in his editions of the North Carolina poems of A.R. Ammons. But Alex's interest in North Carolina extends beyond literature. In the 80s, he wrote and co-produced the UNC TV documentary, Boogie in Black and White, about an early African-American movie produced by Lord Warner Pictures and filmed in Greenville, North Carolina. More recently, he published The Forgotten First, B-1 and the Integration of the Modern Navy, which was a finalist for the 2014 Montaigne Medal and winner of a 2014 William Parker Peace History Book Award from the North Carolina Society of Historians. Not too long after handing NCLR over to me, Alex and his wife Elizabeth had a son, Silas, and then the three of them moved to Fountain, just outside of Greenville, where Alex has been active in town and county politics, serving on the Fountain Board of Commissioners and as mayor pro tem. He has since been elected to represent District 4 on the Pitt County Board of Commissioners. In downtown Fountain, Alex and Elizabeth opened the R.A. Fountain General Store, which hosts music, mainly bluegrass, most weekends, as well as, no surprise, the occasional reading by a visiting writer. Neither will you be surprised to hear that the walls of this local gathering place are lined with bookshelves filled with first and special editions, rare and recent, used and new, cloth and paperback books for sale. For this enterprise and so much more, Alex was honored in 2017 by the North Carolina Writers Conference for his, quote, efforts to create a vibrant and unique literary and cultural center and community resource. The John Tyler Caldwell Award for the Humanities honors distinguished individuals who have strengthened the educational, cultural, and civic life of North Carolinians through their life work. Well, that certainly describes the career of my colleague and friend, Alex Albright, and I am honored to bestow the 2021 Caldwell Medal upon him. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching this evening. Thanks also to Sherry Paula Watkins and to John Shelton Reed for his remarks and for his long and impressive career as the leading barbecue humanist in the South, which means, of course, the world, Texas included. And thanks especially to Margaret Bauer for her kind and generous introduction and for keeping NCLR going for all these many years. I want also to thank the North Carolina Humanities and especially Melanie Moore Richardson for her work in setting this up. I thank them for this award and for producing this event and for doing it virtually for everyone's safety during our plague years, and also for their good work these many years. 2022, I believe, will mark 50 years of promoting the promise and integral place the humanities should have in all our lives. This is a special award because it's for a lifetime's labors in promoting what has truly been my pleasure to promote. NCLR would not have happened without the tutelage of Bertie Fearing or the vision of Keith Sparrow, who was our Dean of Arts and Sciences, but he was really the uber Dean of Humanities at ECU for many years. It wouldn't have happened without Eva Roberts, whose artistry and design literally changed how I see the world. When NCLR first came out, our co-sponsor, Lytton Hist, was having their annual meeting in Raleigh, and Roy Parker, who was president then, held up the first issue. And he talked in glowing terms about this gorgeous new magazine that had come out, being published in, he said, of all places, East Carolina University. And the room full of folks kind of laughed. They chuckled and sort of like, wow, East Carolina is doing this. We did, and we still are, thanks to Margaret. That first issue, you'll see, has the grackle on it. That became our unofficial state bird in our unofficial campaign to establish East Carolina as our 51st state. We chose the grackle for this cover because there are so many of them and so many people look at them and think, where did all these things come from? And they're so common. We took that as a badge of honor for what we were trying to show the rest of the state as we demonstrated to the rest of the state not only what could happen in Greenville and in East Carolina, but how we could tie that in to not only the rest of North Carolina, but to the rest of the world, in a worldview that encompasses the humanities and all that it brings to us in our understanding of how we live in that world. I was visiting friends in California when Erwin Hester, the chair of English at ECU, caught up with me in the late summer of 1981 to offer me a job teaching freshmen on a one-year contract, renewable for 3 years. On our phone interview, he said I should come home, that I'd love Bee's barbecue, which I did and do, and will likely pick up a pound and a pint on my way back to Fountain later today. I taught freshmen for all these many years, and on the first day of class during each semester, I'd try to teach them just 2 things, I'd say. The first, how to turn off your TV, which it morphed over the years into how to turn off your phone. It's a lesson I never successfully taught to anyone, I don't believe. But the second was to consider all that they saw, all that they thought, as originating from very distinctive points of view based on a primary factor of where they are and how they watched, how they saw the world. And to see how different things look when you change your place or your age, how the layering on of experience changes how you'll see things. First of all, you think of it maybe as a wall, and that you're looking at the wall, but someone else is looking at that wall from a different point of view. We're both looking at the same thing, but seeing something different. And neither of our views are wrong. They're different. And they are determined by where we are. That's a bioregionalist point of view. In the mid-'80s, REM, the band, came up with this song, Stand in the Place Where You Are. But I already knew about bioregionalism from Buck Gavin, who played trumpet in the U.S. Navy B-1 band. I met Mr. Gavin because of Pitch a Boogie Woogie. He was in the soundtrack band to that. He was also one of the B-1 Navy bandsmen who helped integrate the modern Navy. And when I first met Mr. Gavin, I drove up to his house in Fayetteville, and he had on his car a license plate that said Earth. And I got into his living room, and we were talking, and I said, "So, Mr. Gavin, why do you have this license plate on your car that says Earth on it?" And he looked at me like, "Yeah, you don't know anything, do you, dude?" And he said, "Man, that's where I'm from." I took that lesson back to my freshmen and I added it. That was a third thing. I wanted to teach them where they were from. So when I had a student from Alamance County and that person said they were from Burlington, I'd say, "Where in Burlington?" And they'd say maybe, "Well, it was really just outside of Burlington. It was more in Hall River." And I'd say, "Well, where in Hall River?" And they'd say, "Well, maybe it was a little bit outside of Hall River. It was in Hall Fields." And I would say, "Was it near the Hall Fields Presbyterian down by the cemetery there?" The point being that all those different places matter. And being from Hall Fields is different from being from Burlington. Being from Hall Fields is different from being from Graham. Being from Graham, graduating in 1969, is different from being in Graham in 1868, when you might have been the first black city councilman living on North Main Street, and you might be taken from your home and lynched at the Court Square in Graham, a history lesson that we all never heard growing up. So all of that leads us to trying to understand a little bit more about the forces that molded us as we grew up, even when we didn't know about those forces. I went to high school with students whose great-grandparents were awfully treated by the Klan in 1868. One was lynched. And we never talked about that. We never heard about it until last summer. It really started to come about, the summer of George Floyd, of Black Lives Matter, of all that anger, all that misunderstanding, those statues. So we're still here today, fighting some of those same things. I didn't even realize until I was grown that I had grown up in the Jim Crow South. I thought of that as a historic period that was over. It certainly wasn't over when I was growing up, and it doesn't still seem to be over now. I'd also like to thank Jake Mills for his role in helping me understand where I came from. Jake was from Burlington. He became my colleague at ECU in the 1990s, and he introduced me to a lot of what I had not paid attention to in Alamance County, the eccentric nature of it, the depth of character that exist in folks that you don't really pay that much attention to sometimes, that we drive right by. And Jake knew them. He knew all the places, and I remembered the places. I remembered a lot of the people that he talked about. I tried to get away. I left Graham, I think, the day after I graduated high school and went off to college as quickly as I could get away. So it was a long journey to get back to that place, in my mind and really in my heart and my understanding, so that I might understand better, Faulkner's notion of that postage stamp of soil, Eudora Welty's dictum to let your stories grow out of that dirt beneath your feet. And I did. I looked at the dirt in North Carolina, the soil, the difference in Eastern Carolina and West in the Piedmont. When I got back to North Carolina in '81, when Erwin Hester brought me back to teach freshman English, I discovered here a new generation of North Carolina writers. Bland Simpson, Janet Lemke, David Soselsky, Joseph Bethanti, to name but a few, who were telling stories about where they were from. And they were all from different places, and their stories were all different, but they came together, often in the pages of NCLR, with this thing that at the time was called a literary essay, soon became known as creative nonfiction. So when we moved to Fountain, I was happy to be back in a small town. I'm not so sure I would have thrived quite as much going back to Graham. I do go back there often now, and I love the place. But I knew having grown up in Graham with parents that valued education and public service. My dad was on the school board, the local town council. He and my mom were both active in civic groups and church, very active in our local church. So I knew all of those things. So I knew how to be in a small town when I got to Fountain. And I've loved being there with Elizabeth. Our son, who's now graduated Appalachian, has gone out on his own, sports editor in Waynesville. But that's where I go back to in my mind and in my heart when I'm looking elsewhere. But often I'm looking right where I am, which is what I want all of us to do, is to pay attention to where we are and how we got to where we are, and how as we age we see things differently and we think about things differently, and we can continue to grow. NCLR has grown and grown and grown. It has changed. It has thrived under Margaret Bauer's editorship. It will go on after her, just as it went on after me. And these are the stories that will get told in new generations as those people come along year after year after year, and we're all forgotten. I'm glad to be here tonight and to remember all these folks that helped me, going back all the way to Miss Farrell. The first word I ever learned was look. So I keep looking and keep watching, keep paying attention. And I turn my phone off regularly. It's hardly ever on. And right now, our TV isn't even working. So we're fine out in the world where we live, and I hope y'all are too. And stay safe, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Gutierrez, and I'm privileged to serve as North Carolina Humanities Board Chair. Alex, on behalf of North Carolina Humanities Board of Trustees, congratulations. It has been a pleasure celebrating with you today. Thank you for your important educational and cultural contributions across North Carolina. Thank you again to our speakers, sponsors, guests, and of course all of you at home. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to support North Carolina Humanities, I encourage you to donate now. As a special way to further celebrate our newest Caldwell laureate, Alex Albright, those who make a gift to North Carolina Humanities in honor of Alex will receive a copy of North Carolina Literary Review's inaugural issue that was overseen and edited by Alex. This special gift is available to those who make an honorary gift now through the end of the year or while supplies last. We thank you in advance for your generosity and support. We hope today's program has inspired you and excited you. North Carolina Humanities invites all of you to practice humanities, read a book, visit a museum, meander along a history trail, eat some barbecue, and of course, embrace the cultures around you. Our most recent Caldwell awardee, Alex, demonstrates that a commitment to the humanities is a wholehearted embrace of a community. Yes, he is a writer, a teacher, an editor, an archivist, and a folklorist, but he also runs a cultural center, a meeting place for his community, and he is a local political leader sitting on the Pitt County Board of Commissioners. The humanities are public. They live in the world. I invite you to emulate our Caldwell honoree, share the humanities, connect with your neighbors. Thank you, and on behalf of North Carolina Humanities Board and staff, be well.